Hi, my name is Kelly Tebow, and I'm with the New Jersey Center for Tourette Syndrome and Associated Disorders. I will be your facilitator for this evening. I'd like to welcome you to our webinar on getting into the weeds with medical marijuana. Thank you all for joining us. Before I introduce our speaker for tonight, I'm going to cover some housekeeping items with you. All participants are muted. If you have a question, please type it in the bottom of your question box and click send. You may send questions during the webinar. However, we will have Ms. Ross answer the questions at the end of her presentation. We will get to as many queries as time allows. In addition, tonight's presenter is available to take your questions on the Wednesday webinar blog, which is accessed from our homepage under the heading Programs. This blog will be monitored for the next 7 days. Feel free to look and post questions as often as you like. Answers will be archived for future reference. If you missed part of the presentation or would like to watch it again, an archived version of the will be posted to our website. We value your input, and in order to expand the webinar experience in the future, we need everyone to fill out the survey when you exit the webinar. The New Jersey Center for Tourette Syndrome Associated Disorders and its directors and employees assume no responsibility for the accuracy, completeness, objectivity, usefulness of the information are presented on our site. We do not endorse any recommendation or opinion made by any member or physician, nor do we advocate for any treatment. You are responsible for your own medical decisions. Now, I'm happy to welcome our presenter tonight, Svetlana Ros, a partner at the law firm of Pashman Stein Walder Hayden. Lana is the chair of the firm's healthcare practice. She works with the physicians, dentists, nurses, and other healthcare professionals, as well as healthcare businesses, to help them navigate the complex and constantly evolving healthcare environment. Lana also represents clients in investigations, audits, and refund demands by private insurance companies, Medicare and Medicaid, as well as fraud and abuse investigations by federal agencies, including the Office of Civil Rights and the Office of Inspector General, by state agencies such as departments of health, banking, and insurance, and state attorneys general. Additionally, Yana is a sought-after presenter and frequently lectures throughout New Jersey and New York on wide-ranging legal issues affecting healthcare professionals. Welcome, Lana. We appreciate you coming tonight. We know you're coming at this from a legal standpoint, not a medical standpoint, so you can't answer medical questions, and we appreciate that. We'll try to weed those out as well. Welcome, and take it away for us.
All right, thank you. So hold on, let me just share my screen and bear with me because I have multiple screens and I'm gonna need somebody to confirm that you're looking at the right screen.
Okay, I will do that for you.
Hold on, so let's see. I think you're looking at, hold on, you know what, I actually probably should start running the presentation.
Beautiful lake scene.
That's going to be, I wish that I could tell you that that was my lake house. It is not. It is what I wish my lake house to look like and to look at Maine.
Okay,
can you see my...
We're on the sharing screen where I can see your notes.
You can see my notes. Okay, that means you need to see different screen. You know what? Okay. How about now?
That works.
Okay, great. All right. So thank you for your patience. As Kelly mentioned, my name is Lana Ros. I'm an attorney. The reason I wanted to share that with you is because I just want to set the expectations up front. I'm not a clinician. I'm not going to be able to answer any questions from a clinical standpoint. I know that prior to the presentations, there were a few people that submitted questions. A number of them were clinical, so I apologize ahead of time. I will not be able to answer any of them, mainly because I don't have a medical license to do so, nor am I going to, nor do I have the knowledge to answer that. So as Kelly mentioned, my predominant area of law that I practice is healthcare. And that's kind of how I come into the space of medical cannabis. I work with healthcare providers and day-to-day various government agencies and things of such. And as the regulations for medical cannabis began to expand, at that time I was with a different firm. They said, you lead regulations for a living. Don't you want to know and learn these regulations as well? And I said, of course I would. So that's how I found myself in this particular space. I am part, even though I'm the chair of the healthcare group at my firm is a multi-specialty firm, and we do have a very strong cannabis group, which is extremely busy right now, fielding phone calls related to adult use. So we do span the whole cannabis space for our clients, whether it's from a medical standpoint or whether it's from adult use. No lawyer can start a presentation without, of course, giving some sort of a disclaimer. But basically what I'm going to tell you up front is that even though I'm going to be sharing different legal positions and various items with you, whatever I say cannot be taken as an attorney-client relationship, and just simply presenting information to you. Even if I'm answering a question, please understand that I'm not your attorney. Every case is specific, and that would require a separate consultation. So nothing that I'm telling you can be taken or should actually be considered as legal advice, even though, again, as an attorney, that can sometimes be seen as that. The other thing I do want to mention also, if I failed to mention throughout this presentation, this presentation is specific to New Jersey. So the laws, aside from where I mentioned some of the federal regulations or some of the federal laws, the predominance of this presentation is going to focus on New Jersey. I do practice in New Jersey and New York. I'm licensed in Pennsylvania as well, but New Jersey and New York are the two predominant states that I focus in. So with those administrative pieces out of the way, let's get started. I am going to leave, my goal is to talk for about 45 minutes or so, and leave about 15 minutes for questions. Hopefully, I will address some of the questions as we go through this. I know that the presentation has also been shared with you, and I tried to include various links for things that I might have pulled from the web. This way you can go and verify them. The theme of all of this is I'm sharing some information for you, but you need to do your research. You need to stay on top of this. A lot of medical cannabis, especially from a clinical standpoint, is very new and developing, and don't believe everything you see online. So again, I'm sharing information, use it as you like, but this is more of maybe a tool for you to start your journey, to decide whether or not that this is appropriate for you or not appropriate for you. That also said, I don't necessarily believe that this is something that you have to engage in. This is a personal decision, and this is a conversation between you and your provider whom you choose to utilize if you do believe that medical cannabis is something that you want to explore. I take no position either way. And that actually is my personal position. I think it's not even like a disclaimer. It's more, I think this is something that each individual has to make for themselves. So where are we, right? This is on a federal level. right now, and I'll talk a little bit in the next slide, this is still technically an illegal substance. Well, it's not technically, it is illegal, but on the state regulatory side, over the last few years, I think we've seen an expansion really pick up in this space. So from a medical use, right, as of May 2021, according to this website, we have 36 states and 4 territories that allow for medical use. And then we have, as of the summer, we have 18 states, 2 territories, and the District of Columbia that also have regulations that allow for adult use. New Jersey recently passed it, and New Jersey does have an adult use statute as well. I'll touch upon it quickly towards the end, but the focus of this is the medical side of things. All right. So just some basics, and I understand that some people may already know this, though, but I just kind of want to lay the groundwork for things. It is important to still understand that on a federal level, marijuana is a controlled substance, Schedule 1. What does that mean? It is still a legal substance. So on a federal level, marijuana or medical cannabis or cannabis, adult use cannabis, is an illegal substance. How do you ask, do the states pass? This is the fun part of law, right? You have federal laws, you have state laws, and then they intercept. So basically what happened, especially where the federal government currently stands and why I think a lot of the states have pursued passing their own laws, is that the federal government kind of has taken a step back as long as they see that the states are actively engaged in their regulating and the individuals are in compliance with those regulations. So back in 2009, under Obama's administration, he basically sent a memo to the federal prosecutors asking them not to prosecute in states that have passed some sort of a law, whether it's medical or adult use, and to save the resources and not to prosecute in those states. In 2013, the Department of Justice had actually even issued a memorandum or a memo basically confirming that they will, at this particular time, will kind of hold off on challenging those states that have passed regulations that are contradictory to federal law. That memorandum was rescinded in 2018, and basically that administration said, well, it's up to the U.S. Attorney's Office to decide whether or not they're going to, what they're going to do about it. What this all means from a very long history of it is basically up to today, what we've seen is that the federal government has basically taken the position that if the states are regulating and they're being diligent about it, the federal government is not going to utilize their resources, meaning money. Everything costs money, right? Every investigation requires somebody to do it, and therefore they have to spend money to investigate and to prosecute. So they've basically taken a step back and said, we're not going to spend government money to enforce the illegality of marijuana as long as it's, the states are patrolling it and that is being done. One of the things that the federal government did in 2018 is that they removed hemp out of the definition. So prior to 2018, the entire plant, the entire cannabis sativa L plant, which is the marijuana plant, was considered Scheduled 1. And so back in, I believe it's December of 2018, the federal government basically redefined what constitutes marijuana, and they backed out the industrial hemp and any cannabinoids that are less than 0.3% THC, meaning the most common that we hear about is CBD. So CBD, quote unquote, became legal. And that's why now you see it all over the place. The problem is that even though it's legal, some of the ways it's being used, it's not necessarily in compliance with law. So that's on the federal side, which is important to keep in the back of your head, because technically, and the fact that it remains an illegal substance, you'll see throughout this presentation, is kind of this nagging, irritating component to why certain things are the way they are in the medical cannabis space, and why there's so many restrictions and so many unknown things that are happening, because the laws just do not match up and they contradict themselves. And it just takes time for people to figure out how they're going to work together. So New Jersey, I don't know if any, I think I was probably surprised to learn that when I really started looking at this, that New Jersey had a compassionate use medical marijuana act dating back to 2010. Even though we're super slow and there's all these other states that are so far ahead of us, we've actually had it on the books for quite some time. It actually was signed into law literally the day before Chris Christie took office. So he inherited it. I'm presuming that had it landed on his desk the next day, it probably would not have been signed, but there it was. So during his 2 years in as a governor, there was progress, but there was very minimum progress that took place. And as we most likely know, when Murphy was campaigning, he made a big deal about, expanding medical marijuana and making cannabis legal in the state of New Jersey. He's ultimately succeeded. It took him a little bit longer than he thought it was going to, but he ultimately succeeded. So one of the first big changes, one of the main big changes that happened under Murphy's administration is a real expanded revamp of the Medical Marijuana Act. There's a lot of revisions, and we'll go over some of the ones that I think are probably of interest to the people on this presentation. But basically know that aside from the name change, so it went from being KUMA to J. Koning's Compassionate Use Medical Cannabis Act, mouthful, it really expanded. It's made it more accessible. The concept of it is more accessible and provides various protections, encouraging those who might be interested in participating in the program to kind of partake in it. It also established the Cannabis Regulatory Commission, which would become the overseeing body that would implement regulations and oversee medical and adult use in the state of New Jersey. It took quite some time to get there, but a few months ago, we finally got the commission in place, and the first meeting that they had was in April. And I can tell you the majority of everything that they've done so far to date has focused on adult use. So going back a little bit, just for, again, some basic information about cannabis, like I mentioned, the marijuana plant is known as the Cannabis sativa L. That plant actually has 80 different natural occurring cannabinoids. The two that we know the most, so the ones that are talked about the most, is THC and CBD. If you really want to see me struggle, you can ask me to say those names. I'm not a scientist, I'm a lawyer. So THC is the part that gives us that high, right? What marijuana is known for, the smoking and feeling high. That's THC. CBD, the part that actually is no longer illegal under the federal law, is the non-psychoactive cannabinoid, and it potentially has various medical qualities. The reason I say potentially is because, again, CBD is not currently being regulated by the FDA, and the FDA regulates medical drugs, and so there's still research that needs to be done to make various claims. So CBD, you know what, I retract back. The CBD, FDA does regulate it but not in the same level as they regulate prescription drugs or over-the-counter drugs. CBD kind of falls under the auspice of supplements and vitamins right now, and those are not as stringently regulated because they cannot make medical claims. So CBD can't, you know, individuals who sell CBD are not allowed to make claims such as that it's going to alleviate your anxiety or it's going to treat cancer or things like that. And I'm sure as you're listening to me, you're saying, Lana, what are you talking about? I see this all the time. Again, like I said, don't believe, you know, there's a lot of things taking place. It's going on really quickly, and there's not enough enforcement taking place from a state level. And so there are things that are being said that are not necessarily always legal. All right, so how can you be eligible? What conditions do you need to have in order to be eligible to participate or consider participation in the program? So the initial qualifying medical conditions that were part of the 2010 CUMA Act were actually called debilitating conditions. We've changed the name from debilitating to qualifying. And here's the list that I'm sharing with you. I don't really need to go through it, but just kind of wanted to give it to you for a point of reference. And then we have, like I mentioned, Murphy comes to office, and one of the first things he does within 3 months in office is add 5 new categories. And as you can see, it's anxiety, 2 forms of chronic pain, migraines, and for the purpose of this presentation, it's Tourette Syndrome. About a year later, because we are in the midst of an opioid epidemic and there is supposedly some clinical support, and again, I'm not saying there is or there isn't, but our administration believed there was. They've passed the concept that if you potentially have an opioid addiction, that can be, you can substitute medical cannabis for opioids. And so that was a way for them to try to combat the opioid addiction, because again, it's believed that marijuana is non-addictive and it can help treat a lot of the pain that opioids were being prescribed for. So just to give you an idea of how important these additional conditions were, so as I mentioned, Chris Christie was in office for 8 years, and the CUMA Act passed right as he took office. During his 8 years in administration, we had he ended his governorship with about 17,000 patients in the program. We now are, like 3 years into 3 years into Governor Murphy's administration, and we have in excess of 100,000 patients. So clearly you can see exponential growth in patients being able to partake in the program. And a lot of it had to do with some of the changes we'll go over in a bit, but also because he made it much more accessible for those individuals that have other medical conditions. So why is the change to the program so important? So about, I guess, a year and a half into his administration, the CUMA Act was reformed. And as I mentioned before, it is now called the J. Conan Compassionate Use. And so some of the important changes, at least the ones that I think are important, is that the revisions to the Act now allow for a patient to obtain up to 3 ounces of medical cannabis, whereas before they were only able to obtain 2 ounces. They've also expanded the authorization period from 90 days to 1 year. So I think at this point, I think it might be helpful to pause and mention that the space of medical cannabis is pretty much all cash-based. As I mentioned, that confliction between federal and state, because it is still a federally legal substance, few banks enter this space. Most of the banks that actually do enter the space are just smaller community banks. You don't have really any large banks coming into this space. You have no insurance coverage for here. So this is, if you anticipate going to a medical provider, understand that you will be either paying 100% cash. Some of them may accept credit cards, but there's even issues with credit cards. A lot of credit card companies were denying contracts when they were finding out that services included for involving marijuana were being used. So if a patient needs to go and see their physician every 90 days to renew their prescription, that is at every 90 days, aside from the monthly cost that they're incurring for paying for the medical cannabis, they're also incurring an office visit. And physicians and generally charge a few $100s. I've seen it range from anywhere from $150 on the really, really low end to probably closer to $300, $350, depending on the physician. So that's an additional cost that somebody's incurring quarterly. This act allows the physician to make the decision that they do not need to see the patient as frequently. I do want to make this clear so that if your provider says, well, I want to see you in 90 days or I want to see you in 6 months, they have that right to do so. What this revision did is allow them to say, I can authorize it for you for up to a year, but they still have to use their clinical knowledge to decide how frequently they want to see their patients. And often, especially in the beginning, when you're trying to establish some sort of a relationship with them and also figure out what works and what doesn't work and various other things, they may want to see you more frequently. So expect that. The other thing I want to mention, and this is probably just more one of my pet peeves, is that people refer to it as a prescription, that you get a prescription or a refill of your prescription. Again, because it is an illegal federal substance, it cannot be a prescription. You cannot use your DEA to prescribe medical cannabis, even though you have to have it in order to authorize it. What it's called is it's an authorization. You authorize for the patient to go to a dispensary and obtain medical marijuana. Additionally, again, with the concept of trying to ease access for patients, they've expanded who can authorize medical cannabis. It used to be only a physician can do it. Now a physician assistant or an advanced practice nurse can also authorize medical cannabis. One thing I did not mention in this, and I think it actually goes toward a question that was posed previously, is that one of the things that Murphy did through an administrative order is that he made it easier for physicians and advanced nurses and nurse practitioners to register with the program. Because previously, in order for a physician to be able to authorize medical cannabis, not previously, as a law, you have to be registered. But previously, if you were registered with the program, your information would be made public, which really deterred a lot of physicians that were really not interested in having a large patient population, but they may be interested to be registered to be able to provide for their existing patients. So now a physician can register, but they don't have to, their profile doesn't have to be public, which is important because if you're looking for a provider and you're looking on the website, and that was a question I think that was posed before the presentation. If you're looking to find somebody, don't just look on the website, because that is a limited pool of individuals. That is a pool of individuals who have intentionally would like to build a bigger medical marijuana practice, and they've intentionally made themselves public, inviting a bigger medical marijuana population. What I suggest is that you speak with your actual provider first. I found that a lot of my clients who were considering entering this space were more concerned about their patient, and they really wanted to partake in the program just to help their existing patients. So your provider might already be registered, you just haven't found them on the website. They may be willing to register just for you so that they can work with you if you are interested, and they believe that that's something that they can help you with. So they can register, again, keeping their profile non-public and not necessarily being afraid that they're going to constantly get phone calls for patients who just would like to have a prescription for medical marijuana. So that's just something for you to have a conversation with your providers. Additionally, the Act provided various protections. Prior to 2019, there wasn't a lot of protection provided for patients or caregivers of medical marijuana program. And so now there is some protection from an employment standpoint, from housing standpoint, and a few others. It also provided for reciprocity. So if you are an individual who has recently relocated to New Jersey, and you have an existing medical marijuana card from another state, they will give you reciprocity for, I believe, up to 6 months, so that you can find your own provider and kind of transfer the care here. It also provides for home delivery. However, we still do not have it. That is something that needs to be taken care of by the Cannabis Regulatory Committee, which, as I mentioned, was just recently formed, and they have been busy dealing with regulations necessary to implement the adult use. So even though New Jersey technically has a home delivery regulatory system, we don't actually have any licenses, nor is it legal to deliver cannabis at the current moment. So everything, you go online and you find that, they'll deliver for donation, some brownies and cookies. Those are all illegal ventures at the current moment. So if everything that I've said to you sounds interesting and it's something that you want to partake, you need to find a registered healthcare professional. And then the other piece is you're going to have to find a dispensary. So let me, move on to the next slide, because I think that's going to talk a bit more about this in more detail. So the law requires for you to have a bona fide relationship with a physician or like I mentioned, another healthcare professional who's allowed to authorize under the law. Bona fide relationship is one of those situations where it's left up to the interpretation of the physician for now. I'm very conservative, so my definition of bona fide relationship probably would not match many of the physicians who are in this space and are kind of known to be, the marijuana doctor. You have to be a resident of the state of New Jersey, and you need to have a qualifying medical condition. That's what we went over previously. There is very specific and helpful information. New Jersey actually maintains a pretty good website that will walk you through kind of what you need to do and the steps you need to take. But basically, you register with the program. There's a fee to register. There are discounted rates for various individuals if you qualify, and your registration is valid for 2 years. I think what I want to focus on and what I want to stress is that there's an importance to choosing an ATC. And what an ATC is an alternative treatment center, and for our purposes, it's what you would know, or what everybody understands as a dispensary, where you would actually go to purchase the medical cannabis. I put in a link. New Jersey maintains an active link of all of the licensed dispensaries. When you enter into the program, you have to choose one of the ones that are currently open, and that is your dispensary where you can go and get your marijuana. You can ultimately change them. It's just a system. You go in and you update that you want to change it. But the importance of this is that if you are registered with one, but you go to a different one to purchase, they won't sell anything to you. And the other important element of this is that from a clinical standpoint, I think you will find that a lot of physicians don't really have a lot of input into the space. This is still a developing area. A lot of them are interested in it. Medical cannabis was not taught in medical school. A lot of it is based on, very limited research. And so you'll find that from a practical standpoint, the ATC, your relationship with the dispenser is probably going to be where you're going to get the most amount of the device that you are seeking with regards to concentrations, with regards to form of intake, whether you should be smoking it, whether you should be getting it in a gummy form, what kind of flower you should be getting. But a lot of these, they're very advanced. There's different variations between concentration of THC versus CBD. Some have higher concentration of THC and lower CBD. Some have higher CBD, and a lot of these ATCs have specialists that really at least present as that they know what they're talking about. But I think what you'll find is that a lot of it is trial and error, and really working closely with the ATC to finding out what may or may not work for your situation, and if it does or it doesn't. Since I know there's a number of parents on the line, and because I know that obviously TS affects minors, I thought I would spend a minute just to go over the additional elements when it comes to getting a minor into a program. The requirements are all the same, but they have an additional element because we are dealing with a minor. The healthcare practitioner that is going to be authorizing needs to be a pediatric specialist. If they're not, then what you're going to need to have is you're going to need to have a pediatric specialist, most likely a pediatrician, who is willing to basically provide an opinion to the registered practitioner that says that they believe that the minor is most likely going to get some sort of therapeutic benefit from the use of medical cannabis. So obviously it'd be easier to go to somebody who has the pediatric specialty. If not, you can work with the pediatric specialist. They may not be willing to register into the program, but they might be willing to work with another healthcare provider who is in the space. The other important part from a parent standpoint, the parent or the legal guardian is very actively involved in this process. Aside from obviously taking the minor to the physicians, they are actually responsible for maintaining and controlling and administering the medical cannabis to the patient, to the minor. And so they will, when you register for the program, if a minor is registering for the program, you automatically have to pick a caregiver that's going to register along with that minor. You don't have to pay a separate fee for it. There's fees waived from my understanding, but you have to have a caregiver associated with the minor. and they are going to be legally responsible for all of the laws that oversee medical cannabis. All right. So as I was preparing for this presentation, I was thinking, I know I'm going to talk a lot, and this doesn't seem to be very interactive up until, we get to the question and answer portion. So I thought, what type of questions do I think that maybe come up that may be of interest, that I can go over and make this a little bit more interesting than just dry law that I've been talking about so far. So here are some questions. I'm sure they're not all the questions, but these are common questions that I hear. Can I grow medical cannabis at home? No. New Jersey does not allow for anything to be grown at home, whether it's medical, whether it's adult. So at the current moment, the answer is pretty clear. The answer is no. How much can I buy? And we kind of went over that. Right now, you can buy up to 3 ounces per month. How about edibles? Can I purchase edibles? So this one is an interesting one because it really comes down to how do you define edibles. So if you look on the New Jersey website in their Q&A section, they take the position that edibles are not allowed. But when you read the law, edibles are allowed. And why the discrepancy? Again, because of the different definitions. So an edible, such as a tablet, a capsule, a gummy, chewable form, those are allowed. But an edible in the form of a cookie, a brownie, something that you've baked into it, those are not allowed. And so that's important. And again, you can go on the website and you can Google, and there will be plenty of various companies that are currently preparing brownies and cookies and things of that sort, and they will deliver them to your house. But that does not mean that it is legal. Does insurance cover it? No, unfortunately, it is not covered. And actually, the regulations are pretty clear. They carve out and they say that at the current moment, health insurance does not need to cover medical cannabis. Can it be smoked in public? So the answer is it depends again. And the rule that actually applies is the same rule that applies to cigarettes. So if you can smoke a cigarette, then technically you can smoke medical cannabis, meaning that New Jersey has, I'm going to get this wrong, New Jersey Smoke-Free Air Act. And basically, as majority of people know, it basically prohibits you from smoking in public spaces. So while you can smoke it, it would fall under the same kind of regulations and requirements as regular smoking does. What happens if I'm an inpatient? And this happens frequently. You may be a medical cannabis patient and you go to the hospital, or you have a procedure and you are admitted. And when you're admitted, they kind of take possession. If anybody's ever been admitted to a hospital, they take possession of all of your medication. And they technically will take possession of your medical cannabis. Generally speaking, if you come to the hospital and you are on some sort of, let's say, hard medication, the general rule of thumb is that you would not be able to take your hard pills. The hospital physician will figure out what you need and they would prescribe, and the hospital would administer those medications to you while you're in the inpatient. The hospital cannot prescribe medical cannabis, so it puts them a little bit in a situation that they don't really know what to do. What I would suggest you do is you talk to the hospital themselves. Most of them have passed policies as to how they handle it, and what generally happens, and again, each hospital has their own policy. Generally, what happens is that they will hold possession of the medical cannabis, and if you need to consume it, they will provide it to you, and you will have to consume it. You will have to administer it yourself. They will not do it for you. What about if the child needs to consume medical marijuana while they're in school? Again, this is one of those where I would suggest to you have an open conversation with the school that your child attends. There are specific regulations that have directed non-public schools to pass policies. I have seen that some of the associations for public schools have passed templates, and so they have to treat that as an accommodation. So again, have that open conversation, but understand that if a child is allowed to consume during school hours, whether they're on the bus or whether they're in school premises, the guardian or the caregiver that is registered with the minor will have to come to the school and be the one that provides the child with the medical cannabis. That is not something that you can delegate to a nurse. Other questions that frequently come up, I thought I would see them separately for a different slide, are questions under employment law. This is something that constantly comes up, and I wish I could give you a clear-cut answer. This is something that the employers and the employees are struggling with, and not necessarily because the employers all want to have their stringent laws. A lot of them are actually towards and are willing to support medical cannabis use. It's just that regulations are not very clear for them, and there's kind of new waters for them. The law is developing. I'm happy to report that on a very general sense, and the law is now provides for anti-discrimination to patients who participate in a program. So you cannot be discriminated against simply for being a medical marijuana patient. And then if, let's say, your employer has a policy and no drug policy, and they test for medical cannabis and you come up positive, they have to give you an opportunity to present to them that you have a medical cannabis card, and therefore you are obviously going to come up positive. Where this gets a bit wishy-washy is when you start talking about federal funding or high-risk positions. So there are still employers that rely heavily on federal funding. So if you're working for the federal government, or if you are a contractor for the federal government, most of those employers are probably going to have very strict policies prohibiting any sort of drugs, and that so far has been supported, and the statutes do allow employers in situations where they may potentially lose federal funding or they may be in violation of federal law, they give them a pass on the discrimination component. If this is something of interest to you, I suggest following it closely. It's constantly, I feel like it's changing on a day-to-day basis. The one thing I can tell you for sure is that you cannot consume at work. The statute is pretty clear that even though you cannot be discriminated against, there is no right for consumption at work. And the best way I can kind of explain it is, think of it as alcohol. If you're not allowed to consume alcohol while you're at work, you most likely cannot consume any sort of cannabis, whether it's medical or recreational, because you can't come to work under the influence. The same thing holds true for driving, whether it's a vehicle, whether it's a heavily, one of those big trucks situations. So you cannot be under the influence. And that becomes an issue because, unlike alcohol, which you can test whether you are under the influence at the present moment, currently we don't really have any sort of testing devices that can determine when cannabis was actually consumed, to determine whether or not you're actually under the influence or not. So that becomes kind of an issue for employers and employees. There's experts who supposedly can figure this out, but I just repeat that most employers don't have an expert who can decide whether you're under the influence or not at any particular moment. So that's pretty much most of my presentation on medical cannabis. I did want to spend a few minutes talking about adult use because I suspect that people have questions about it and kind of how the two overlap. As I mentioned, in the beginning of this year, New Jersey joined the, I guess, what is it, 36? I can't remember at this point. States that have legalized cannabis or marijuana. We are one of the few states that actually passed it by vote. If anybody voted in the 2020 elections, you may remember question 1, and that passed, and Governor Murphy signed it into law March 1st of 2021. And the CRC passed the regulations on August 19th. If anyone is interested in their question is going to be about when applications are going to be accepted for adult use. I think they were supposed to start accepting them like in 2 days, and I don't think they're going to be meeting that deadline. So what's the, you know, what are some of the differences? You know, this is going to be something that a lot of people are asking. If we now have adult use, what's the importance or what's the relevance of having medical? I think there's a few. Number one is so far all of the indications, whether it's from the statutory standpoint or whether it's from our administration, have shown that medical is going to take priority over adult use, meaning that at least right now, the way the law is supposed to work is that we're going to try to make sure that the medical need is met before we allow expansion into adult use. So the huge dispensaries that we currently have right now, backed up by millions and millions of dollars, that are providing all of the medical cannabis in the state of New Jersey, the only way that they're going to be allowed to start participating in adult use is if they can demonstrate that they can meet the medical use before entering that space. How that's actually going to happen, I'm not 100% sure, but at least that's the representation. The other reason I think is it's important is because I think that if and when cannabis is reduced to at least a Schedule II and becomes legal on a federal level, I think insurance companies are going to have to start covering it. I think there's going to be laws that pass and they will start to provide full coverage because they will be considered more of a medical drug versus something that is an illegal substance. That is probably a bit further down the line. More immediate is that medical cannabis it's taxed, and by next year, I believe there's going to be no tax on medical cannabis, whereas adult use is going to be taxed, and various municipalities are enacting their, various tax levels and to make money off of that. And then the other big difference is right now, at least, you can get up to 3 ounces for medical, whereas adult use can only get up to 1 ounce. So those are just some basic major differences. There are obviously many more, but those are kind of, I think, the ones that are the most relevant for today's presentation. I'm going to end with just by noting that I do, as I mentioned before, I think you need to do your own research. And I've included various websites. They are government websites and they are pretty well maintained, where you can find a lot of the information that is shared with you. You can find the ATCs, you can find the requirements, you can find the laws if you're interested in reading them. There's a lot of information there. I would encourage you, if that this is something that you're interested in, starting your research in that particular space. And on that, I think I am out of time. And so I am going to turn it over and see if there's any questions.
All right, great. Thank you very much, Lana. Appreciate your time on this. So we did have a few questions come up, and I'm sure that there will be more as I speak them. So if I am not in the state of New Jersey, where do I get information on medical marijuana in my state?
So I think you can start by looking at the first true slide. I think it's slide 3, and that has this, depending on what state you are, you can see, and if that slide is too small, I included the link, and you can go on that link, and that kind of compiles different information, and you could actually, if I remember, the map is interactive. You can click on a particular state you're in, and it will tell you whether there's adult use, whether there is medical, whether there's limited. And once you know that, I actually think that website might also even have direct links for each particular state. But you want to start, ultimately, you want to find your true source is one of the government websites, and start your research there, because as I mentioned, it's vital to be in compliance with the law to have, to minimize prosecution.
Can a teacher get fired for using at night if they have a medical card?
So technically the answer is no. I would talk to your union and see if they are advancing those policies, because like I said, and I would start with double checking what the drug policy is for the school district. If you get drug tested frequently, then I would caution you on that, because you may potentially be the case that creates case law in that space. I am not an employment lawyer, and I don't remember if there was any recent cases having to do with teachers, but the law does provide for protection. So I think your union probably would be the best way to start first, because they're going to be the ones that are going to provide that level of protection. And I would not go on what I'm going to say, because if I'm wrong, it's not going to bode well for you. But I think that there is supposed to be a mechanism for you to be able to participate in a program without retaliation from the school district.
Okay. So if cannabis is federally illegal, but it's legal in my state, how does that affect me traveling? Does that mean I can't take my medical marijuana into a state that doesn't have marijuana laws?
So technically you cannot actually, if you're being very, very technical, you can't cross state borders with medical cannabis, even if you're going into another state that has medical cannabis laws allowing it, because because you're crossing interstate. So in that second where you're crossing borders, you're actually entering federal, and then on top of it, whether you're going to a state that has medical cannabis laws or it doesn't, their laws might be different. So I would check with the state if they allow for some sort of reciprocity. But generally, on the very conservative side, I would say that you shouldn't be crossing borders with medical marijuana or any sort of marijuana. It's kind of like traveling. Think about it like traveling with a firearm. Even if you're crossing from one state to another that allows firearms, you can't really cross state borders with firearms.
Okay. I think you actually answered this, but I'll ask it again. If cannabis was federally legal, would we be able to, or could medical marijuana be covered under insurance?
Yeah, I think once it becomes a federally legal substance and they put it as a schedule, I would imagine they would make it Schedule 2. It would fall into the same category as, let's say, your Xanax or oh my God, why am I blanking? Any kind of opioid. And I would imagine the same administration that's going to push for it to be legalized is going to push for it to be covered under insurance. What I will say is that I think those are going to be steps. I think it's going to have to become legal, and then there's going to have to be laws that pass that it needs to be covered by insurance, unless the FDA approves it as some sort of a drug, and then it becomes a covered drug under under insurance that has to pay for it.
All right. Is there any, if we keep it to what it was, I think you said it was 3 ounces that you can have legally as under with a card, and you're just traveling within the state of New Jersey, is there any problem having the 3 ounces or less on you?
As long as you have your medical card on you. And whether it's your medical card or you're the caregiver, as long as you have the medical card, you are not you're not supposed to be charged with anything. You're not in violation of any laws.
Okay. But it definitely has to be within the state of New Jersey.
Yeah.
Okay, great.
I would caution about crossing, because I don't know if the sister states will recognize, they have their own laws. And again, you're crossing interstate borders, you're getting into interstate commerce.
Yep, I understand. All right. Well, we don't currently have any additional questions. And we have hit the 8:30 hour. Somebody asked about cruise ships. Well, then you're in international laws.
You're in international law. You know what? I've never actually thought about that one. But again, I would say that that's probably not a good idea, because you're at the current moment, the importance of compliance and avoiding prosecution is being in compliance within the particular state. And because it is still illegal on federal, it's specific to your state that you're part of that particular program. So even though you may be going to a different state, they're not regulating you. And that's the important part. The federal government has taken the position that we're gonna sit back and relax and not use our money to enforce, because we're going to take the position the states are overseeing enforcement. So if you're going to, I don't even know, Ohio doesn't have necessary jurisdiction over you because you're not part of their program. You're not registered in that program. And I would venture to say taking it on a cruise ship is probably going to be considered just regular adult use, which would be illegal.
Okay, great. So thank you very much, Lana, for your presentation tonight. There was a lot of interest. Our next presentation, Mental Health and Media, Its Stigma and Stereotypes, will be presented by Meg Isbitsky, and is scheduled for October 6th, 2021. This ends tonight's session. Thank you, Ms. Ross, for your time and your presentation. Thank you, everyone, for attending. Good night.
My pleasure.